Dr. Lucas Grant checked his watch as he stepped off the SkyTrain into downtown Vancouver. The city hummed with energy, a perfect backdrop for the medical conference he would attend later. Despite the beautiful morning, something felt off. Nagging disquiet beneath his composed exterior. Inside Pacific Center Mall, sunlight streamed through the overhead dome, warming the polished floors below. Lucas joined the line at a coffee kiosk, savoring this brief pause before his day of presentations and surgical panels would begin. The familiar scent of roasted coffee beans usually centered him, but today his mind wandered. He glanced at his Apple Watch, tapping it absently, when movement across the counter caught his eye. In an instant, his world tilted. Gabrielle Moreau, his ex-wife, stood just 20 feet away, surrounded by 3 teenagers. Lucas froze, his pulse spiking to 187 beats per minute according to his watch's alert. The teenagers captivated him more than Gabrielle's cold stare. Each carried unmistakable echoes of his own features. The tall boy's analytical gaze, the girl's precise movements, the younger boy's curious eyes. The family resemblance hit him like a physical blow. Time seemed to stop. Background conversations faded to a muffled hum as Lucas tried to process what he was seeing. Memories he'd buried years ago surged forward, demanding acknowledgement. The oldest teen, nearly an adult with an ironic smirk, broke the silence. "Mom said you'd recognize us. Guess you're not as smart as TV says." His quiet voice carried, just far enough for Lucas to hear, the words cutting deeper than any surgical incision. Lucas's breath caught. His coffee order, called twice now by the barista, went unanswered as he stared at what could only be his children. Gabrielle remained composed, her elegant posture betraying nothing while her eyes held a mix of determination and old pain. Around them, shoppers continued their morning routines, unaware of the drama unfolding. A mother guided her young child past them. A businessman barked into his phone. A group of students laughed over shared jokes. Yet for Lucas, the world had narrowed to these 4 people who shared his past, and apparently, his DNA. "I need to," Lucas began, but the words died in his throat. What could he possibly say? Sorry seemed inadequate for whatever had brought them here now, confronting him in such a public space. He stepped away from the counter, leaving his coffee and seeking distance to collect himself. Each step felt leaden. The mall's bright lighting suddenly seemed harsh, exposing every emotion he'd rather keep hidden. As Lucas retreated down the corridor, reflections bounced off the polished surfaces around him, distorted images that seemed to multiply with each step, just like the questions erupting in his mind. Who were these children? How had they found him? And most importantly, why now? The oldest boy watched him leave, arms crossed, while the girl observed with clinical interest. The youngest boy, perhaps 14, looked away, his face a complicated mix of hope and disappointment. Gabrielle simply waited, as if she'd anticipated his reaction precisely. Lucas escaped around a corner, back pressed against cool marble, heart hammering. The conference, his reputation, his carefully constructed life, all of it suddenly felt hollow compared to what he'd just encountered. The reflections in the mall's decorative mirrors offered no answers, only fragmented images of a man whose past had finally caught up with him. Lucas found a quiet bench away from the main thoroughfare. As his pulse gradually slowed, his mind raced back 15 years to Montreal, where everything had changed. Their apartment had been modest but warm, filled with Gabrielle's touches. The upright piano in the corner, fresh roses on the dining table, and the constant smell of her favorite vanilla candles. On the surface, they'd created a picture-perfect life, but beneath lurked growing tension neither wanted to acknowledge. Lucas had been rising quickly in surgical circles, his ambition driving him to longer hours and higher-profile cases. Every successful operation fed his confidence, every academic publication enhanced his reputation. He'd wrapped himself in this professional identity so completely that he barely noticed the growing distance at home. Gabrielle had faced her own battles. Each miscarriage, there had been 3, left invisible scars. She'd masked her grief with determined resilience, while Lucas retreated further into his work, avoiding the emotional wreckage he didn't know how to navigate. The breaking point came during a stormy October evening. Rain lashed against their windows as Montreal's lights blurred in the downpour. Gabrielle confronted him in their kitchen, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "You call me broken," she'd said, hands gripping the counter until her knuckles whitened. "But you're the one who can't fix anything that matters." Lucas had dismissed her with clinical detachment. "Your body's failing basic biology." "Gabrielle, it's not my fault nature isn't in our favor." He winced now, remembering the cruel precision of his words. He'd spoken to her like a problematic case study, rather than his wife who was suffering. After that night, Gabrielle made a decision Lucas wouldn't discover until years later. Without telling him, she began in vitro fertilization treatments, determined to have children with or without his emotional support. She attended appointments alone, endured procedures in silence, and carried her hope like a secret weapon. Meanwhile, their home life deteriorated further. Lucas, increasingly concerned about his professional image, made a catastrophic choice. He falsified Gabrielle's medical records at the hospital where he worked, altering her infertility diagnosis to protect what he saw as potentially damaging information for his career. The betrayal went beyond mere dishonesty. It was a fundamental violation of both medical ethics and marital trust. When Gabrielle discovered what he'd done, their marriage imploded spectacularly. The divorce proceedings were bitter and swift. Lucas moved out during a snowstorm, carrying just 2 suitcases and leaving behind the piano, the roses, and any chance at reconciliation. He hadn't known about the successful embryo transfers, hadn't known Gabrielle was already pregnant. When they signed the final papers, hadn't known he'd left behind not just a wife but the beginnings of a family. Lucas rubbed his temples, the mall's ambient noise pulling him back to the present. How had he justified his actions? He'd told himself he was protecting his career, that the world needed his surgical skills more than one woman needed his heart. The rationalization sounded hollow now, sitting alone on a bench while his unacknowledged children stood just 100 yards away. His phone buzzed with conference reminders. Keynote speech in 3 hours. Panel discussion afterward. Media interviews scheduled for tomorrow. His professional life continued its relentless march forward. But something fundamental had shifted. The past he'd outrun for 15 years had finally caught up, wearing the faces of 3 teenagers who carried his genetic code. Lucas stood, straightening his blazer with hands that weren't quite steady. He needed answers. More importantly, he needed to face what he'd been avoiding for 15 years. Whatever Gabrielle's reasons for this confrontation, he couldn't walk away. Not again. As he made his way back toward the coffee shop, Lucas noted the irony. He'd performed thousands of surgeries, literally holding beating hearts in his hands, yet he'd never truly examined his own. The precision that made him brilliant in the operating room had failed him completely in understanding the damage he'd caused in his personal life. He spotted them still there. Gabrielle now seated at a small table while the 3 teenagers stood nearby, their body language a mix of defiance and uncertainty. The youngest boy coughed into his sleeve, a small detail that triggered Lucas's diagnostic mind. The slight stoop to his shoulders, the faint bluish tinge to his lips, the careful way he breathed. Signs pointed to respiratory issues, possibly cystic fibrosis. Lucas felt a new kind of ache. Had one of his children inherited a condition he could have helped manage? Had he been present? Gabrielle saw him approaching and straightened, her hand protectively reaching toward her children. 15 years had added subtle lines around her eyes, but none to her resolve. She'd always been the stronger one, Lucas realized. He'd just been too self-absorbed to see it. The moment stretched between them, loaded with 15 years of absence and unanswered questions. Whatever happened next would change everything. Lucas took a breath and stepped forward to face the consequences of choices made long ago. The busy atrium of Pacific Center Mall became an unlikely stage for their confrontation. Lucas approached cautiously, noting how the 3 teenagers shifted closer to Gabrielle, a family unit, closed against him. "We should talk somewhere." "Private," Lucas suggested, his doctor's voice failing to mask his unease. Gabrielle shook her head. They wanted a public place, their choice. The oldest teen, nearly adult, stepped forward. "And I'm Raphael," he said, offering no handshake. "That's Sophie, he's Noah." Each introduction came with a slight nod toward his siblings. "We know who you are." Lucas registered each name like new data points. Raphael. Sophie. Noah. His children. The weight of their names alone made his throat tighten. "How did you find me?" Lucas asked. Sophie, 16 and watchful, answered instead. "Medical journals list conference speakers months in advance. Your TV schedule is public." Her tone was matter-of-fact, clinical, unnervingly like his own. "Finding you was simple. Deciding. Whether to come was the hard part." Lucas noted her precision, the way she held her notebook against her chest like armor. She had his analytical mind, but none of his arrogance. A correction Gabrielle had clearly made in raising her. Raphael paced the perimeter of their small gathering, tension visible in his shoulders. He wore a faded Vancouver Olympics hockey jersey, 2010, Lucas realized with a jolt. The year he'd left Montreal, had Gabrielle bought it as some kind of reminder. "Mom didn't want this," Raphael said, glancing at his mother. "This was our idea. Mostly mine." Noah, the youngest at 14, stood slightly apart. His breathing seemed labored even at rest. Lucas's medical instincts cataloged symptoms automatically. Barrel chest, slight digital clubbing, occasional dry cough. Classic. Cystic fibrosis presentation. A sudden protective urge surprised him, an unfamiliar feeling outside his professional context. "Why now?" Lucas asked, directing his question to Gabrielle. She sighed, years of carefully contained emotion in the sound. "Your medical show has been running reruns in Montreal. They couldn't avoid seeing you anymore, even if I wanted them to." A family walking past stared curiously at their tense grouping. Lucas became acutely aware of how public this moment was, his private failings exposed under the mall's bright lights. Sophie opened her notebook, revealing meticulously organized pages. "I've been tracking your career since I was 12, she said. "Your surgical innovations in pediatric cardiac procedures, your research papers, your television appearances. Each achievement laid out in her neat handwriting. You save children every day on TV, but you didn't even know we existed." The accusation hung in the air between them. Noah coughed again, more deeply this time. "I've watched all your episodes," he said quietly, his voice both hopeful and wounded. "Even the ones about CF." Lucas felt the ground shift beneath him. His TV series had dedicated 3 episodes to pediatric cystic fibrosis cases. Had Noah watched his biological father discuss the very condition he struggled with, never knowing their connection? "How long have you known about your diagnosis?" Lucas asked Noah, doctor mode activating automatically. "Since I was 4, Noah answered. "A mom made sure I had the best care," Raphael snorted. "That's why we're here. To remind you that while you were playing celebrity doctor, we were actual people with actual lives." Sophie closed her notebook. "We have questions." "And you deserve answers," Lucas acknowledged. "All of you." An announcement echoed through the mall about closing in 30 minutes. The artificial environment, recycled air, programmed lighting, background music, suddenly felt stifling. Real life couldn't unfold properly in such a manufactured space. "There's a park across the street," Gabrielle suggested, her first concession to Lucas's discomfort. More privacy. As they gathered their things, Lucas noticed Sophie slip something into her pocket, a small USB drive. The gesture seemed deliberate, meant for him to see. Outside, late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small urban park. They claimed a cluster of benches near a fountain. The sound of splashing water provided both background noise and a small buffer of privacy. Noah sat beside his mother, his movements careful and measured. Raphael remained standing, too restless to settle. Sophie positioned herself directly, across from Lucas, her gaze unflinching. "You falsified Mom's medical records," Sophie stated. Not a question, but an accusation. Lucas flinched. How did you—" "I'm good with computers," she interrupted. "Hospital security isn't—" Gabrielle touched Sophie's arm. "We agreed to let him explain first." Lucas looked at each face turned toward him, these three strangers who shared his DNA, and the woman he'd once promised to love forever. What could he possibly say that wouldn't sound like excuses? "I made choices I thought would protect my career," he began, hating how selfish the words sounded aloud. "I was wrong. Profoundly wrong." "Did you ever wonder about us?" Noah asked suddenly. "Even once?" The directness of the question from the quietest of his children struck Lucas like a physical blow. Had he wondered? Or had he sealed that chapter of his life so completely that even curiosity couldn't penetrate? "I didn't know you existed," Lucas answered truthfully. "But that's not an excuse. I should have known. I should have asked. I should have stayed connected to your mother." Raphael made a dismissive sound. "Should have, could have. Great. Problem solved." Lucas met his oldest son's angry gaze. "You're right to be angry. I haven't earned anything from you. Not forgiveness, not understanding, certainly not respect. We're not here for—" "Apologies," Sophie said, her voice steady. "We need to know if you're going to acknowledge us publicly." The question surprised Lucas. "Is that what you want?" Three different expressions faced him. Raphael's defiance, Sophie's calculation, Noah's hope. Each wanted something different from him, Lucas realized. Each had constructed their own version of who their father might be. Versions his real self would inevitably disappoint. "I need you to know something first," Lucas said carefully. "Whatever happens next, whatever you decide you want from me, I won't disappear again. That's a promise." As the words left his mouth, Lucas realized he meant them. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he was making a promise based not on what he wanted, but on what others needed from him. The fountain bubbled behind them, indifferent to the drama unfolding on its edges. A family taking an evening walk passed by, the parents swinging a laughing toddler between them. Lucas watched them, suddenly aware of all he'd missed. First, steps, school plays, hockey games, science projects. Sophie held his gaze. "We'll see if you keep that promise," she said simply. "But first, we need to tell you about Noah." Lucas sat in his hotel room that evening, tie loosened, conference presentation abandoned. His phone displayed 17 missed calls, his agent, the conference organizers, the TV network. None seemed important compared to what he'd learned in the park. Noah's cystic fibrosis had progressed despite excellent care. Recent lung function tests showed concerning declines. He needed specialized treatment, possibly surgery, that wasn't available in Montreal. Treatment that Lucas, with his connections and expertise, could arrange within days. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, he'd built his reputation on saving other people's children, while his own needed the very expertise he'd perfected. Now, sitting in a sterile hotel room with its generic art and overpriced minibar, Lucas faced the real cost of his choices. His laptop chimed with an email notification. Gabrielle had sent Noah's medical records, comprehensive documentation of 14 years of treatments, hospitalizations, and procedures. Lucas scrolled through them, his professional eye noting the progression of symptoms, the increasing frequency of interventions. Noah had been hospitalized 6 times in the past year alone. His last pulmonary function test showed just 62% capacity, dangerously low for a teenager. The most recent CT scan revealed early bronchiectasis developing in his lower right lobe. Lucas rubbed his eyes. How had he lived so completely disconnected from his own flesh and blood? The question hammered at him as he reviewed medications, treatment protocols, and specialist notes. Noah's doctors were good, Gabrielle had ensured that, but they lacked the cutting-edge approaches Lucas had helped pioneer. A text message lit up his phone. Sophie, with characteristic efficiency, had sent him her contact information. in case you actually mean what you said about not disappearing," the message concluded. Lucas saved the number immediately, then hesitated over his response. What could he possibly say to this daughter who'd tracked his career from afar, who'd hacked hospital records to uncover his past misdeeds, who clearly protected her siblings with fierce intelligence? He settled on simple truth. "I meant it. Thank you for trusting me with your number." Her response came quickly. "I don't trust you yet, but Noah needs you." Lucas set down his phone, her words echoing in his mind. "Noah needs you." 3 words that cut through years of professional accolades and public admiration. His son needed him, not Dr. Lucas Grant, television personality, but Lucas the father he'd never been. He opened his laptop again and began typing. Email to his lawyer about amending birth certificates, message to his agent canceling the next 3 months of filming, note to the hospital board requesting emergency privileges for an incoming patient transfer. By midnight, he'd initiated the dismantling of his carefully constructed life to make room for the one he'd abandoned. Morning brought cloudy skies and a summons he hadn't expected. Gabrielle wanted to meet, alone, at a small cafe near Aini, his hotel. Lucas arrived early, nerves making him pace outside before entering. She sat by the window, looking out at the rainy street, a cup of tea untouched before her. 15 years had added silver strands to her dark hair and fine lines around her eyes, but her posture remained elegant, her gaze direct when it met his. "You've been busy," she said as he sat down. "Sophie tells me you've already contacted 3 specialists." Lucas nodded. "The team at Vancouver Children's is world-class for CF cases. Dr. Rivera trained under me. She'll take Noah's case personally. And the birth certificates, the lawyers, in progress," Lucas confirmed. "I'm not contesting anything, Gabrielle. Full legal acknowledgement, financial support, whatever they need." She studied him, searching for the catch. "Why now? Because they found you? Because Noah's sick? Or is your ratings season ending?" The accusation stung, but Lucas didn't flinch. "I deserve that. But this isn't about me making myself feel better. It's about doing what I should have done 15 years ago." "Which is what, exactly?" "Being their father," he said simply. "However they'll let me." Gabrielle's fingers tightened around her cup. "You think it's that simple, that you can just decide to be a father after all this time?" "No," Lucas admitted. "There's nothing simple about this. I know I can't make up for 15 years of absence in a few grand gestures." Rain streaked the window beside them, blurring the outside world. Inside, the cafe's warmth and the smell of fresh pastries created an intimacy that made their conversation feel both private and exposed. "Noah idolizes you," Gabrielle said finally. "Your medical show. He's watched every episode twice. He doesn't know I sent you his records." Lucas's chest tightened. "And Raphael hates what you represent. Success without accountability. Fame without responsibility." She sighed. "Sophie's the practical one. She sees your value in Noah's treatment, but she's protective. Don't underestimate her." "I wouldn't dare," Lucas said with the ghost of a smile. "She's formidable." "She's you without the ego," Gabrielle corrected. "All the intelligence, none of the selfishness." The barista approached with Lucas's coffee, interrupting briefly. When they were alone again, Lucas leaned forward. "I've been offered a position at Montreal General," he said. "Head of pediatric surgery. I could be there by next month." Surprise flickered across Gabrielle's face. "You'd leave your show? Your practice here?" "For Noah's treatment? For a chance to know them? Yes." She shook her head slowly. "You always did think you could fix everything with one dramatic gesture." "This isn't a gesture," Lucas insisted. "It's a commitment. I'm not asking to move in next door or pretend the past didn't happen. I'm just asking for a chance to be in their lives, however they'll have me." Gabrielle was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words against 15 years of raising their children alone. Finally, she took a sip of her tea. Decision made. Noah has a hockey game tomorrow night, she said. He won't be playing. His lungs can't handle it right now, but he keeps stats for the team. 8 o'clock at the community center on 4th Street. Lucas recognized the olive branch for what it was. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Gabrielle warned. Raphael will be there too, and he's not as forgiving as his brother. She gathered her purse to leave. Gabrielle fixed him with a final penetrating look. Or prove me wrong, Lucas. Prove that you can care about something more than your reputation, because if you disappoint them again, I won't give you another chance. She left him sitting alone, coffee cooling, as rain continued to tap against the window like a metronome counting the years he couldn't get back. The community center hummed with activity. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in stark brightness. The smell of hockey, sweat, rubber, and the distinctive scent of ice permeated the air. Lucas arrived 20 minutes. Early eyes, choosing a seat near the middle of the bleachers where he wouldn't stand out but could still see Noah at the scorekeeping table. Families trickled in, filling the stands with casual conversations and rustling snack wrappers. Lucas felt acutely out of place in his tailored coat among parental denim and team jackets. A few people glanced his way with vague recognition. The kind that comes from seeing someone on television but not quite placing them. Noah spotted him first. Surprise flashed across his face, followed by a hesitant smile before he ducked his head back to his statistics sheets. The simple acknowledgement sent an unexpected warmth through Lucas's chest. Gabrielle arrived minutes later with Sophie. They sat several rows away, close enough to monitor the interaction but far enough to give space. Sophie met Lucas's gaze directly, her expression neutral but watchful. As the teams took the ice for warm-ups, Raphael appeared at the penalty. He wore a team jacket with "assistant coach" emblazoned across the back. The sight of his oldest son in a position of responsibility caught Lucas off guard. This wasn't a sullen teenager killing time at his brother's game. This was a young man with purpose, shouting encouragement and tracking players with a critical eye. The game began with a clash of sticks and the sharp sound of skates cutting ice. Lucas found himself drawn not to the action but to his children. Noah's focused concentration as he recorded each play. Raphael's passionate coaching. His voice, occasionally rising above the crowd. Sophie's quiet observation, missing nothing. Halfway through the first period, Noah abandoned his statistics table during a timeout and approached the bleachers. His breath came in careful measures. The trained breathing of someone who knows their lungs have limitations. "You actually came," he said, stopping a few feet from Lucas. "I said I would," Lucas replied simply. Noah nodded, processing this. "I have questions about my CF. I'll answer anything I can." "Not now," Noah said, glancing at the rink where play was about to resume. "But maybe after." "Absolutely," Lucas agreed, trying to contain the surge of hope he felt. "Whenever you want." Noah returned to his post as the referee's whistle blew. Across the rink, Raphael watched the exchange with narrowed eyes before turning deliberately back to his team. The game continued, a blur of action, cheers, and groans from the crowd. Lucas found himself cheering reflexively when Noah's team scored, earning a surprised look from his youngest son. By the final period, Lucas had cataloged a dozen details about his children he hadn't known yesterday. Noah's methodical approach to statistics, Raphael's natural leadership, Sophie's quiet attentiveness to her brothers. When the final buzzer sounded, announcing a narrow victory for Noah's team, the crowd began dispersing. Lucas remained seated, unsure of the protocol in this unfamiliar territory of fatherhood. Should he approach? Wait to be approached. Leave? His uncertainty was resolved when Noah appeared at his side, equipment bag slung over one shoulder, breathing slightly labored from the excitement. "Mom says we can talk if you want," Noah said. "There's a Tim Hortons next door." Sophie materialized beside her brother. "I'm coming too," she stated, leaving no room for negotiation. Lucas nodded, grateful for any opportunity. "Of course." The coffee shop offered a stark contrast to the rink: warm lighting, the smell of coffee and donuts, soft background music instead of shouting fans. Noah and Sophie claimed a corner table, while Lucas ordered hot chocolates for them and coffee for himself. As he waited at the counter, he noticed Raphael enter, still in his coaching jacket, hesitating by the door before reluctantly joining. His siblings. Lucas approached the table, setting down the drinks. "I got one for you too," he told Raphael, sliding a hot chocolate toward him. Raphael's jaw tightened, but he accepted the drink without comment. An awkward silence settled over the table. Lucas had performed surgeries under extreme pressure, given lectures to hundreds of medical professionals, even handled live television broadcasts, yet sitting with his 3 children rendered him nearly speechless. Noah broke the silence. "I watched your episode about CF gene therapy last month. Is that really going to be available soon?" Lucas focused on the medical question with relief. "The clinical trials are promising. For patients with your genetic variant, it could significantly improve lung function." "Could I qualify?" Noah asked, leaning forward. "I've already spoken with the research team," Lucas admitted. "They're reviewing your case." Sophie's eyebrows rose. "You've been busy." "Yes," Lucas acknowledged. "When something's important, you make time." Raphael snorted. 15 years too late, but sure. The tension crackled between them. Lucas didn't defend himself. There was no defense. "I've accepted a position at Montreal General," he said instead. "I start next month." 3 pairs of eyes widened in surprise. "You're moving to Montreal?" Noah asked. "Yes." "What about your TV show?" Sophie questioned. "On hiatus, possibly ending, depending on how things go." Raphael studied him suspiciously. "Why? Because of us? Because you suddenly feel guilty?" Lucas met his oldest son's gaze directly. "Because priorities change. Because I've missed 15 years I can't get back. But I don't have to miss any more." "What if we don't?" "Want you around," Raphael challenged. "That's your right," Lucas acknowledged. "I'll respect whatever boundaries you set, but I'll be available for Noah's treatment, for questions, for anything any of you need." Noah fidgeted with his cup. "Mom said you might be able to get me into the clinical trial faster." "I'm trying," Lucas confirmed. "My former student runs the program. She's reviewing your case personally." Sophie watched him carefully. "And if Noah wasn't sick, would you still be moving to Montreal?" The question cut to the heart of Lucas's intentions. He considered his answer carefully. "Yes," he said finally. "Noah's condition makes the timeline more urgent, but I would still want to know all of you, sick or healthy." "Convenient that you can swoop in as the medical hero," Raphael muttered, but his hostility seemed slightly diminished. Lucas shook his head. "I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to be a father. Probably not a very good one at first. But I'm trying." The honesty in his voice seemed to reach even Raphael, who fell silent, turning his cup in his hands. 2 weeks later, Lucas found himself in the sterile corridors of Vancouver Children's Hospital, accompanying Noah through preliminary tests for the gene therapy trial. The familiar hospital environment, antiseptic smells, squeaking shoes on polished floors, the distant sound of paging systems, felt different with his son at the center. Noah sat on the examination table in a small consultation room, hospital gown making him look younger and more vulnerable. His chest x-rays and latest pulmonary function tests were displayed on the monitor. The numbers weren't good. 57% lung capacity now, down from 62% just months ago. "How bad is it really?" Noah asked, gesturing toward the screen. Mom tries to stay positive, but I can tell when she's worried. Lucas chose honesty. "It's concerning. The progression is faster than we'd like to see." Noah nodded, absorbing this. "That's what I thought." "But," Lucas continued, "the gene therapy could significantly slow or even reverse some of the damage. That's why getting you into this trial is so important." "And if it doesn't work?" Noah's voice was steady, his eyes direct, a child who had grown up facing mortality. Then we look at other options. New medications, specialized physiotherapy. And yes, eventually possibly lung transplant, but we're years away from that decision. Noah seemed to appreciate the straightforward answer. Raphael says I shouldn't trust you, that you'll lose interest once the doctor hero part gets boring. The assessment stung, but Lucas couldn't blame his oldest son for the suspicion. Raphael's protecting you. That's what big brothers do. Is that what you did? Protect yourself by staying away. The question, asked without accusation, hit harder than Raphael's anger. Lucas took a careful breath. No, I stayed away because I was selfish and afraid, because my career seemed more important than anything else. I was wrong. Noah considered this. I used to watch your show and pretend you were talking, just to me, explaining my condition to me specifically. He smiled slightly. Pretty stupid, huh? Not stupid at all, Lucas said softly. I wish I had been. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Rivera entered, her familiar professional smile warming when she saw Noah. Mr. Grant, we're ready for the pulmonary stress test now, she said, using Noah's last name, Gabrielle's maiden name. Lucas realized with a pang. Noah slid off the examination table. Can he come? He asked, gesturing toward Lucas. Of course, Dr. Rivera agreed. Your father's input would be valuable. Your father. The simple acknowledgement in a medical context made Lucas's chest tighten unexpectedly. The stress test lasted 40 minutes, Noah walking on a treadmill with monitoring equipment attached, breathing apparatus measuring his oxygen uptake. Lucas watched his son's determination with pride and concern. Noah pushed himself hard, refusing to quit even when his oxygen levels dropped worryingly low. Afterward, as Noah changed back into his clothes, Dr. Rivera pulled Lucas aside. He's a fighter, she observed, just like you in the OR. His mother's strength. Not mine, Lucas corrected. Dr. Rivera's expression turned serious. I've expedited his application for the trial. The committee meets tomorrow. I'm pushing hard, but his case is borderline. The disease has progressed significantly. What are his chances? 50-50. His age works in his favor, but his declining function worries them. Lucas nodded, processing the odds. Thank you, Maria. I know you're doing everything you can. Not just for you, she clarified. He's an impressive young man. The drive back to Gabrielle's temporary Vancouver accommodations was quiet. Noah, exhausted from the testing, dozed in the passenger seat. Lucas glanced at him occasionally, the profile so like his own at that age, the careful way he positioned himself to ease his breathing even in sleep. When they arrived at the hotel, Gabrielle was waiting in the lobby. Her expression softened, seeing Noah's fatigue. Rough day? She asked, touching their son's shoulder gently. The usual poking and prodding. Noah answered with forced lightness. I'm going to crash for a bit before dinner. He headed toward the elevators, then paused, turning back to Lucas. Thanks. For today. After he disappeared into the elevator, Gabrielle turned to Lucas. How did it really go? He pushed himself hard. Too hard, maybe. That's Noah, always proving he's stronger than his lungs. The hotel lobby buzzed with arriving conference attendees. Ironically, the same medical conference Lucas had abandoned 2 weeks ago. A few doctors glanced their way, recognition dawning. Lucas ignored them, focusing entirely on Gabrielle. Dr. Rivera will present his case to the committee tomorrow, he explained. It's going to be close. Gabrielle absorbed this with practiced composure, the face of a mother who had received difficult medical news many times before. And if they say no? Then we pursue other options. I've contacted colleagues, and Boston and Stockholm. You really are all in on this, she observed, surprise coloring her voice. Did you think I wouldn't be? Honestly, I thought you'd make grand promises, appear for the important appointments, then gradually fade away when it interfered with your real life. The assessment hurt because it accurately described the man he had been for most of his adult life. "I'm trying to be better than that." Gabrielle studied him, seeing perhaps both versions of him, the ambitious doctor who had abandoned her and the man now fighting for their son. "Sophie texted," she said, changing subjects. "She's discovered some experimental research on your falsified records case." Lucas tensed. "What does that mean?" "It means our daughter has been digging through medical ethics board cases. Similar to what you did. She's thorough, Lucas, methodical." Gabrielle's expression hardened. "If you're not serious about staying, about being there for them, she will document every broken promise, every missed opportunity, every disappointment." "I'm not going anywhere," Lucas assured her. "We'll see," Gabrielle replied. "Words are easy. Showing up when it's inconvenient, that's fatherhood." Before Lucas could respond, his phone rang. Dr. Rivera. He answered immediately, moving slightly away from Gabrielle for privacy. "We have a problem," Maria said without preamble. "I know his blood work from today. His liver enzymes are elevated, significantly. The committee won't approve him for the trial with these numbers." Lucas closed his eyes briefly. "Options? If it's temporary, an infection or reaction, we could retest in 2 weeks. And if it's not temporary, then we're looking at a more complex case than we thought. Possible liver involvement changes the treatment approach entirely." Lucas turned back to Gabrielle, who had already read the bad news in his expression. "How soon can you be back at the hospital?" he asked her. "What's happened?" she demanded, mother's intuition flaring. "Liver involvement. We need more tests." Gabrielle didn't waste time with questions. She pulled out her phone, already texting their other children. 20 minutes. Should I call an ambulance?" "No, but we should hurry," Lucas said, leading her toward the exit. As they rushed to his car, Lucas couldn't help noticing the bitter irony. He'd spent years saving strangers' children on television while his own son's health deteriorated beyond his knowledge. Now, racing back to the hospital, he wondered if his expertise would be enough to make a difference when it mattered most. 2 years later, Montreal welcomed autumn with a crisp morning frost that silvered the edges of fallen leaves. Lucas pulled his coat tighter as he walked through Parc La Fontaine, watching his breath form small clouds in the cool air. The path ahead was familiar now. He'd walked it nearly every Sunday for the past 18 months. Montreal General Hospital had become his professional home, though without the fanfare of his television days. As head of pediatric surgery, he worked long hours but never at the expense of family commitments, a balance he'd once thought impossible. Lucas checked his watch. He had 30 minutes before meeting Raphael for coffee, a monthly ritual that had evolved from tense silence to cautious conversation. His oldest son, now in his first year of university studying psychology, still maintained a careful distance but had slowly lowered his defenses. The gallery was small but well lit, nestled between a bookstore and a cafe in Old Montreal. Inside, Gabrielle's sculptures commanded attention, intricate glass and metal pieces that captured light in unexpected ways. Her exhibition, Reconstructed, had opened the previous evening to critical acclaim. Lucas moved quietly through the space, noting how each piece contained elements that appeared broken, but were reassembled into something new, not perfect, but intentionally transformed. The center sculpture, titled simply 3, featured intertwined DNA helices, each bearing a different gradient of color, but sharing a common core. "What do you think?" Lucas turned to find Sophie beside him, her notebook replaced by a professional camera. At 18, she documented everything with both scientific precision and artistic sensitivity, a bridge between her parents' divergent talents. "It's remarkable," Lucas answered honestly. "Your mother's always been the true artist between us." Sophie nodded, photographing the sculpture from different angles. "Noah's breathing test came back yesterday. 72%. Lucas felt the familiar surge of relief. 2 years of experimental treatments, coupled with intensive physiotherapy, had stabilized Noah's condition. The gene therapy trial had ultimately accepted him, though not until his liver function normalized after 3 tense months of waiting. He mentioned the hockey tryouts are next week, Lucas said. Assistant coach, not player. Sophie corrected. He's realistic about his limitations. Unlike his father, Lucas acknowledged with a small smile. Sophie's expression softened slightly, the closest she came to outright affection. Of his 3 children, she remained the most guarded, though her analytical mind had gradually made room for the possibility that people could change. Mom's giving a talk at 6, she reminded him. Noah would appreciate it if you were there. I'll be there, Lucas assured her. Front row, as promised. As Sophie moved away to photograph another sculpture, Lucas found himself alone again, surrounded by artistic representations of brokenness and healing. The parallels weren't subtle. Gabrielle had always expressed herself more directly through art than words. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, tiny crystals melting as they touched the ground. Lucas watched them through the gallery window, thinking about the nature of transformation. His life now bore little resemblance to the one he'd cultivated for decades. No television cameras, fewer accolades, more quiet evenings helping Noah with respiratory exercises or reviewing Sophie's college applications or listening to Raphael's cautious questions about his past. His phone vibrated, a text from Noah. With a photo attached, the teenager stood grinning beside a lake, holding up a small trophy. Assistant Coach Award. See you at Mom's talk tonight. Lucas smiled, saving the image. These small moments, everyday victories and ordinary connections, had become the measures of success he once would have dismissed as insignificant. As he left the gallery to meet Raphael, Lucas paused to look back at Gabrielle's artwork illuminated in the window. The broken pieces, carefully reconstructed, caught the afternoon light, imperfect but whole in their new configuration. Much like the family they were slowly becoming. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment and a review about this story. If you were moved and enjoyed our work, feel free to help us continue producing. I invite you to click on our link in the first pinned comment. Now, 2 buttons will appear, one to subscribe, if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thank you for watching this far. See you soon.